Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to go deep into what I believe is one of the most powerful teachings in the manifesting world, the law of assumption. Now, I know many of you know me from the Neville Goddard groups, and so you already know about the law of assumption, but what I want to do today is to strip it right down to its essence. I want to talk to you about it in the way that I always do, from the perspective of years of exploring these teachings and testing them and living them and coming to see what actually works in practice. So let's take the fluff out of it, let's take the confusion out of it, and let's get to the heart of what the law of assumption really is, how it actually works, and how you can apply this knowledge in a way that feels natural, effortless, and in harmony with the deeper truth of who you really are. Now, at its simplest, the law of assumption states this: what you assume, in other words, what you know to be true, is what manifests as physical fact. That's it. Not what you wish, not what you hope, not what you half believe on a good day but secretly doubt on a bad day. What you assume. And an assumption is different from a hope or a desire. An assumption is like the ground you're standing on. It's the framework you're carrying around with you. It's the things you take for granted without question as simply how things are. So if, for example, you assume that money is hard to come by, then that assumption will play out in your experience. If you assume that people are unreliable, you find yourself surrounded by unreliable people. If you assume that life is flowing in your favor, then doors will open, opportunities will come, synchronicities will appear, and you'll find yourself guided to everything you need. You see, the law of assumption is always at work. It's not something you switch on when you're trying to manifest something. It's literally the creative principle by which your entire life experience is being generated. Now, this is where I want to bring in my way of understanding it, because it's one thing to say your assumptions create your reality, but we want to go deeper. We want to ask why? Why does this work? What is it in us that has the power to take an assumption, a belief, an inner knowing, an inner stance, and then mirror that out as our physical reality? And the way I see it, the way I always explain it, is that you're not just this human self living in a physical body, trying to make sense of things and trying to get by. That's one layer of you. But there's another layer of you, the higher self, God, the bigger part of you that is literally generating the entire experience. And this higher self doesn't speak in words. It doesn't respond to begging or pleading. It doesn't respond to you saying, please, please, I want this to happen. It responds to what you assume. It takes your assumption as a command. Think of it like this. Your higher self is the creative engine, the supercomputer, and your assumptions are the code you're giving it. You don't need to know how the computer does its work. You don't need to micromanage it. All you need to do is set the assumption, live from it, and the higher self does the rest. Now, this is important because a lot of people hear about the law of assumption and they immediately try to force themselves into believing things they don't actually believe. They say, okay, I'm going to assume I'm a millionaire. But meanwhile, inside, they're still assuming that they're broke. They're still assuming that money is hard to get. They're still assuming that they have to struggle. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Here's the key. Assumption isn't about forcing yourself to think thoughts you don't believe. Assumption is about gently shifting the ground you're standing on. It's about noticing, I've been assuming this unwanted thing as if it's just the way life is, and then choosing to stand on different ground. It's not about fighting with yourself and forcing yourself to believe something different. It's not about convincing yourself. It's about leaning into it, relaxing into it, letting yourself take it on as your new normal, and leaving the old unwanted assumptions behind. Neville Goddard always said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And that's his language for this. What he meant was, take on the assumption that what you want to be true is already true. Not that it's going to become true, but that it already is true. That this is the reality that you are now living. That this is the story that is now playing out. Let me make this practical because I know it can sound a little abstract. Imagine you've been assuming that people don't really listen to you. You've had experiences where you speak and you feel brushed off. So now you kind of take it for granted that no one really values your voice. That's your assumption. Now, if you want to shift that, you don't need to go around telling yourself 10 times a day, people listen to me, people listen to me. That most likely would feel very fake. Instead, you gently step into a new assumption. Of course people value my voice. Of course what I say matters. Why wouldn't it? You let that be the new ground you walk on. And then what happens? Suddenly, you notice people responding differently. They lean in, they listen, they reflect back to you the value that you've now assumed. I'll give you another example. Let's say money. Maybe your old assumption has been, money only comes if I work really hard. And that assumption has created a life where you feel like you have to grind and hustle just to get by. Now, if you shift that assumption to, money flows to me easily. It comes through expected and unexpected ways. I don't have to earn it with suffering. It simply flows. Then what happens? The higher self takes that assumption and mirrors it back as reality. Opportunities appear. Windfalls happen. Ease shows up. Not because you forced it, not because you visualized for 10 hours a day, simply because you shifted the ground you were standing on. Now, Neville also spoke about something called the bridge of incidents. This is the idea that once you've assumed something, the higher self arranges the sequence of events that will bring it into your physical experience. But here's the thing. You don't have to control that sequence. You don't have to know how it's going to happen. In fact, there's no way you can know all of those details at this human level. That is the higher self's job, not the job of the human self. The human self just wouldn't be able to cope with all of that information being downloaded in one go. So your only job is to choose the assumptions that serve you and to then allow the world to reshape itself and form itself around you into your new assumption. So you always need to be the one in charge of the settings. You don't look at what's going on around you and let that determine what you assume. You assume first and then let reality reflect that. Not, I need to see that things are working first and then I'll assume that I definitely do get to have what I want. Because often the bridge of incidents can look messy. It can look like things are going wrong. But if you stay in charge, if you keep assuming that all of this is designed perfectly to lead you to your desired outcome, then in hindsight, you'll say, oh wow, that had to happen in order for the thing I assumed to actually play out. It will all become clear how perfectly it was all set up, but you are the one directing it. If you look at what seems to be a messy situation, you assume it's obviously not working. I must be doing something wrong. This isn't how things are supposed to go. There's no way this can possibly lead to the outcome that I want. Well, you're in charge, whether you realize it or not. And if that's the command you're giving it, reality will go, okay, if you say so, and it will prove to you how true it is that things keep going wrong and that you can't possibly ever have what you want. Whereas if you look at those seemingly messy facts and you go, I can't see how this is going to turn into the outcome I want, but I know what I'm assuming. I know what I've chosen. I know that I get to have what I want, and this is what is being created for me. Then if you're giving that directive, if this is your assumption, then that is what you will cause to manifest into physical fact. So the question to live by isn't, how is this going to happen? The question is, what am I assuming? And then to keep standing in that assumption no matter what. Now, the beauty of the law of assumption is its simplicity. It's not about complicated rituals. It's not about hours of visualization. It's not about getting your vibration perfect before anything can happen. It's simply about what you're assuming to be true. And here's the thing, you're always assuming something. Right now, you're assuming all kinds of things about money, relationships, your body, your future, your past. So this isn't about starting to use the law of assumption. You're already using it. This is about becoming conscious of how you're using it and choosing your assumptions in a way that supports the life you actually want to live. And this is where faith comes in, because sometimes when you set a new assumption, you can't necessarily see any evidence of it physically yet. And your human self starts to panic. It says, see, it's not working. I knew it wouldn't work. That's where you need to remember the higher self operates beyond time. At that level, it's already done. You don't need to make it happen. You only need to stay faithful to the assumption. That's what Jesus meant when he said, when you pray, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. That's the law of assumption in biblical language. Believe you have already received it, that's the assumption, and then it becomes yours. That's the outpictured reality. So let's bring this all together. The law of assumption is this. What you assume to be true gets generated for you by your higher self as your lived reality. So your job isn't to force or to struggle or to beg. Your job is simply to notice what you're assuming and to gently, deliberately choose assumptions that align with what you actually want. And you don't need to know how it's going to happen. You don't need to control every detail. You only need to live from the end, to take the new assumption as already true, and to trust that the higher self is orchestrating everything to match that. And when you do that, life becomes magical. Things line up, synchronicities appear. You find yourself in the right place at the right time. And most of all, you feel at peace, because you're no longer trying to make things happen from the small human self. You're allowing the higher self to do its perfect work by simply setting the assumption. So that's the law of assumption in its simplicity and in its depth. It's not something you use once in a while to manifest a car or a house. It's the underlying principle of how your entire life experience is being created. And when you really grasp that, you begin to live differently. You begin to take responsibility for your assumptions, not in a heavy way, but in a powerful way, because you realize if I don't like what's showing up, I can shift the assumption. And when I shift the assumption, reality has to shift too. That's the gift. That's the power. That is the freedom. And that is how you go about manifesting absolutely everything you desire. That is it from me for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.